All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our presentation, Implementing ADP Streamline in Latin America. This webinar is being recorded, and all attendees are muted, so we encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar in the Q&A box on the top right of your screen. And we will answer these questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, Greg, we're ready to kick this off. I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you everyone for joining. This is Greg Prados with the Spencer Thomas Group. So welcome. Today we're going to be doing a very similar presentation that we did at Meeting of the Minds in San Diego last month. So if you could not be at Meeting of the Minds or you were there and couldn't join the session, you're going to see pretty much the same thing with just a few tweaks. Joining me today to talk about implementing Streamline in Latin America and talk about the lessons that we've learned on our journey are Carlos Alvarez from Jones Lang LaSalle, Finance Director for their Latin America region, and Araceli Ruiz from the Spencer Thomas Group, who was the client-side project manager for JLL for the Streamline implementation in Latin America. So I'm going to kick us off. Carlos is going to tell us a little bit about JLL. Araceli is going to tell us a little bit about lessons learned. So again, any questions, utilize Q&A. We'll answer them all at the end. And at this point, Carlos, I'm going to kick it over to you to talk about JLL and your journey and where you came from and where you are today.
Yep, thanks, Greg. As Greg mentioned, my name is Carlos Alvarez. I'm a Finance Director with JLL, overseeing our Latin America region. As you can see up on our slide, we're a fairly large company specializing in commercial real estate. For LATAM and for what was in scope in this project, we have about 2,000 employees. Not all of them in payroll, so the 2,000 includes some folks that aren't part of our payroll. Something else that I'd like to highlight on this slide here is that we manage, on behalf of our clients, about 4.4 billion square feet. In our region, it's a lot less than that, but we do manage quite a bit of real estate for our clients, and that's something that I'll mention in a later slide as something that was a driver of this project. Can we go to the next slide, please? So in scope, we had 14 countries. Not surprisingly, our three largest are Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil. In Mexico is where we have a majority of the folks that were not in payroll, so the real number for Mexico is closer to the Brazil number, so about 800 individuals that work for JLL in Mexico. Next slide, please. So we have here a number of objectives. I mentioned earlier that I'm in finance, so I'm not a payroll practitioner. So from a finance perspective, the number one goal for finance was visibility. So payroll, being that we're a professional services company, is usually our largest expense line. Actually, it is our largest expense line by far, and we had very little visibility throughout our region to payroll. It kind of functioned. You know, we would provide inputs. They would go into a black box, and we'd get an output. But that output was consolidated. It wasn't very detailed. There wasn't a lot of information that was provided to us from our various legacy providers. And I mentioned earlier that we manage a lot of real estate on behalf of our clients. So that visibility is not only important to JLL, it's tremendously important to our clients. We have a lot of folks that are at our ad client sites that are you know, that we have to relay information to our clients about, you know, how much their services are costing for reimbursement as part of our fees, etc. So being an outsourced provider made visibility to our payroll tremendously important for JLL, and that was something that we just didn't have when we started this project. So some of these other objectives helped us achieve that visibility objective. I mean, I would say from a payroll practitioner and a JLL overall level, you know, our #1 objective would be to pay people timely, accurately, and in compliance with local laws. And I would like to think we were doing that okay. Obviously, with some room for improvement, particularly on being a bit more timely. That's kind of where I was hearing more noise in the system. But you know, a lot of these goals, a lot of the bullets that are here in the slide are helping achieve, you know, making those things better, more accurate, more timely. You know, providing assurance that we're in compliance, and adding visibility. Probably another thing that I would probably highlight here is the amount of providers that we had. We at one point had a different provider in every country, and started on a project of consolidating as much as we could. We got it down to 9 payroll providers, but still too many, way too many. And with this project, we were aiming to get it down to just 1, and we'll talk you through how we did that the rest of the slide. I also want to point out that something that's not here is we did have a long-term view of a return on our investment. Initially that's kind of challenging, with the region being a very complicated region, but we do have also embedded here a return on our investment. We're expecting that to come through towards the end of the project, and you know, maybe even a year or 2 out. Next slide, please. As mentioned before, we started off with 9 payroll providers across 14 countries. You know, kind of related to my earlier point of visibility, we had a lot of our information, a lot of our employee data sitting with these providers and not being housed by JLL. So that was a problem. That was, you know, that caused issues with visibility. Something as basic as headcount. You know, I would get a question on, you know, what's our headcount, and I would always say that it's an estimate. You know, whatever number I provided is an estimate because we didn't have, you know, real-time visibility, and you know, usually our data was, you know, at least a month old. So that's something that we're trying to that we're you know, fixing with this project. We're going to have our ERP be our system of record and not have that information with our provider. Also, obviously, you know, enhancements to the process. We're adding some points of integration, and we're using systems a lot more efficiently to get around having so many. Well, everything was manual previously to this project, so we're getting away from that, from those manual processes. So the project is, JLL is using ADP. We're going to be using their Streamline product in Latin America, and then as our system of record for financials, PeopleSoft Financials, and our system of record for HR is right now PeopleSoft HR, but we're moving towards Workday in 2018. Mentioned, you know, improving the processes and developing some points of integration. We're also working towards a more standardized model. We have a team that sits here in Chicago that's going to be coordinating a lot of the payroll processes. So also working towards a centralized model you know, I won't steal Araceli's thunder, but here's, you know, here's some of the learnings that we had, and you know, she'll elaborate on those. But obviously, you know, these are all very ambitious goals, and being that it's, you know, regional 14-country implementation, overall the project was very ambitious. So what we've accomplished, I think Greg mentioned we've been at this for about 12 months. It's actually, if you count, you know, due diligence and you know, talking to different vendors and you know, the initial planning stages, we've been at this for longer than 12 months. You know, the actual project did start about March, you know, where we settled on ADP, and then very shortly afterwards, you know, came to the realization that we needed some help, and brought on STG to help us out. And I won't talk to the last bullet. Greg has a slide coming up, but you know, we're well on our way, and we see the light. Not quite there yet, but it's been a pretty challenging and positive experience. Greg?
Thank you, Carlos. So everyone, that's kind of where we came from, where we are, and this slide today I'm going to show you is where we are with that list of 14 countries. So as of today, 12 of the 14 are live. We are on target to take Argentina live in May. We actually just wrapped up UAT and are moving into Parallel this week to prep for that May go live for Argentina. And then Brazil is truly running on a little bit of a separate track. Brazil's a little bit different than the rest of the countries, and it is targeted for a August go live. So you can see the go lives, a couple in October, quite a few in December, and then spread out across February, March, April, May, which is, you know, something to consider with LATAM when you're doing multiple countries, is kind of splitting out those go lives month to month so that you can accommodate for each one. So that's where we are today, and I think at this point, Danielle, I'm going to kick it back to you before we transition to Araceli for lessons learned.
Okay, thank you, Greg. So at this point, we have a short poll for everyone to take. On the top right of your screen, you will see the polling button. You can click that to cast your vote. Looks like we have half of the votes in, so we'll give you another minute or two for everyone to submit their vote. All right, if you haven't submitted your vote, you can now, and in a few seconds I'm going to close the poll.
Okay, so Danielle, is the poll closed?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so everyone, you should be able to see on the right side of your screen the polling results. underneath, if you're looking at participants or Q&A, you can see polling. So it looks like we've got about 25% with I don't know what I don't know, which if you haven't started in Latin America is a true statement. But also we've got about 21% with B and C, which is resource availability and in-country expertise. So as we talk about lessons learned, the good news is we're going to actually cover each one of these. All four, A, B, C, and D, are very important when implementing in LATAM, and all things that we encountered with JLL across the 14 countries that we've talked about. So we're going to touch on each of those. If you do have specific questions, again, please type them in the Q&A section. So thank you for the feedback. Good stuff. Araceli, I'm going to turn it over to you for the lessons learned portion of the webinar.
Thank you, Greg. Hi, everybody. This is Araceli. Thank you for joining. I have been working with JLL as a senior project manager during all this process, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we have learned along the way, okay? So LATAM is very complex. This is not new. We have very demanding authorities, complex legislation, and in some countries, we still have manual payments accompanied by procedures that require physical presence, okay? Things take longer than you think they should. Here is when planning becomes paramount, and the use of tools in the implementation, such as project plan, specific milestones, time deviation, etc., help to determine realistic plans. Additionally, the count with available resources that support the project determines whether or not we can meet deadlines. The below three items are really important, and I'm going to tell you about each one, like expectations, preparations, and expertise, okay? Set expectations, involving country leaders in the decision. This is a key point. All teams must be aware of implementation plans and the days in which their support will be required, since the challenge for them will be to attend the project and the day-to-day operation. This is so important to be considered. Obtain local commitment before you start. That is basic to guarantee the success of the project for all the areas involved. I mean, payroll, treasury, finance, accounting, all the areas that are going to be support the project. The next point, understand your current state. In this part, I would like to ask you a question. Are you prepared? Do you have all your historical information? Do you know your benefits as a company? Do you know your calculations? This is, to answer these questions, it's really important and necessary to know what your current state is and to know whether or not you are ready for an implementation. Be realistic about your organization's readiness, preparedness, and capabilities. Be realistic also about the scope of the change you can accomplish, okay? This can help you to determine realistic plans. Next slide, please. Be prepared. Build a realistic timeline. Understand your resource language and skill sets, and accept that it might not be ideal. Why? When companies carry out these kind of implementations, they can realize that in many cases, they don't count with proper information, they don't have necessary knowledge, or they don't know about local legislation in a basic measure. But all this, it's an opportunity to rebuild its payroll area and take control over its operations, documenting processes, establishing controls, and standardizing all the payroll process. Gather and review existing contracts and documentation, and understand that in some cases it might not exist. Not only the current contracts with vendors, along with the lack of policies or procedures, payroll rules, benefits, descriptions, etc. Hire external expertise if you need it. And this is the point to request. In this point, if you realize that you request help of experts that can help you and support you to guarantee a success implementation, emphasize change management. In general, people don't like change, but it's necessary. Next slide, please. Expertise. Here it's really important to identify and include all key stakeholders up front. Know who does what across your organization to delimit and establish responsibilities and support. Communicate with your current providers. This is really important, and more when you have a dependency of them. I mean, if all the knowledge, information are with them, you need to communicate the decision to move to another vendor. External help is invaluable if you lack internal resources. I mean, if you notice that in the implementation you are lack of resources and you need certain expertise or encountering expertise, you need to evaluate additional support. Next slide, please. Other lesson learned. Here we want to emphasize that it's important to be sensitive to cultural differences. Latin America, I'm not saying that it's special, but it has complex authorities, complex rules in payroll specifically, and you have to be aware of that. Be aware of language barriers. I mean, in Latin America, it's necessary to speak Spanish, to speak Portuguese and English. Change management is critical. Understand your role against ADPs and identify issues early and don't get them grow. Raise the hand and establish remediation plans. Understand what your internal customers need, IT, finance, tax, accounting, etc., because all of them will be supported the payroll implementation. Project resources are key. All have to be available. This is really important. Next slide, please. Project resources. Here we would like that you answer these questions about what is your dependency on your current vendor. We have seen that in some cases, companies decide to leave all in the current vendor. I mean, not just the calculations, also the knowing of the company, the knowing about payroll, the calculations, everything is under your current vendor. If that is your case, it's really important that you know what is your dependency about them. What other third parties are involved? I mean, banks, benefits, HR, accounting, auditors. Do your internal resources have the time and skill required? In some cases, we have noticed that companies prepare a project plan, prepare an implementation, but they are not considering there are certain skills that are required for your current people. Do you need external help? Remember that expertise support is invaluable and can drive you to a successful implementation. This is so important to consider. And in case you realize that, try to hire expertise that could help you on the implementation.
Thank you, Araceli. We will now take some questions from the group. Our first question, Araceli, you might be able to answer this best. What is the plan for housing and reporting on data from the prior 9 systems of records or providers?
Sorry, could you please repeat it?
Yes. What is the plan for housing and reporting on data from the prior 9 systems of records or providers?
Okay, well, at first we need to analyze because It depends on each country. I mean, there are different requirements across Latin America depending on the country we are talking about. In some countries, that is necessary to count with information from previous years, in others not. So in case that we need to count with information from previous years, we need to analyze with the current vendor the way to obtain it. In some cases, we can receive information in specific formats or in specific ways, I mean, in Excel files, TXT files. It depends on each vendor. But before that, we need to analyze the better way to transfer this information without involve manual activities.
Okay, thank you. And what are the most challenging countries in Latin America?
Well, usually in Latin America, we have challenging countries like Venezuela, like Colombia, like Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. These countries are I wouldn't say difficult, but they request certain specific information due to they have very demanding authorities. So it makes that these countries get complex, I will say, because we need to deliver specific reports and information to the local authorities. And in addition, there are others like, the situation in Venezuela, in which we need to cover all the government expectations with specific information from employees. And in the case, for instance, of Colombia, the local authorities are very special talking about taxes. We need to deliver taxes on time, on a proper way also, in specific deadlines to avoid local revisions. So, well, each country is special, I would say.
Okay, and the last question for you, what was the largest and smallest employee population in the 14 countries?
Well, the biggest population we have from JLL in Mexico and Brazil, and the smallest one is Panama.
Okay, thank you so much, Araceli. Greg, I have a question for you. It seems like projects take longer in Latin America. How did you keep the project moving?
Yeah, good question. So as you saw, the original plan from JLL was a little faster than what it actually took here, and things do move a little slow. So there's a few things that we did from the JLL side and from the Spencer Thomas Group in assisting them. First, the thing is really coordinating with the existing local providers that Araceli talked about. One of the challenges with the local banks, the local third-party vendors, is getting the information from them. And with 9 separate vendors that we're going to, it was important that the local HR, payroll, finance teams within each country were going to their local providers. So unlike maybe, implementing payroll in the U.S., you're working with different banks, different tax authorities, different third-party vendors within each country. So on a project like this, very important to coordinate early. The second thing I would say is around that support from the local teams, right? So those local teams need to be prepared. You've got to have the support of the local leadership. What we found, and Carlos can certainly attest to this from JLL, there are local finance leaders, local HR payroll leaders within each country that, kind of tier up to the regional teams. Carlos, of course, has the regional. So that, that support has to be there up front. Those teams have to be prepared up front. We did find in some countries that we brought in-country expertise from Spencer Thomas Group. So, for instance, Mexico, we had a couple of resources. Araceli is based in Mexico City, but we brought in another resource to support them. In Brazil, we've got 2 local resources in Sao Paulo helping JLL Brazil. We also had a resource in Argentina. And you might recognize those countries are some of the ones that Araceli mentioned were the more challenging ones. So having that in-country expertise to work with the local teams, making sure the local leadership's there, and we've reached out to the local providers. All of those things are important to keep the project moving. And then, the last thing I think I would hit on is what I mentioned here on slide 10. It's important to stagger the go-lives. One of the things we learned is especially with JLL, trying to move a lot of this to somewhat of a shared service center, as Carlos mentioned in Chicago. They can only take on so much change at one time, right? So staggering the countries in a logical order was helpful for us, and that's why you see here Brazil we kind of parsed out separately, because we knew it was almost a project within itself. So thinking through the way in which you go live is also important to getting, kind of some of the, I won't say easier, but less complex countries live sooner, and taking your time with the more complex countries.
Okay, thanks, Greg. One last question for you. Can you please elaborate on Spencer Thomas's group versus ADP's role on implementing the project, and what were common points of misalignment?
So the role between JLL versus, I'm sorry, help me understand the role between Spencer Thomas Group and JLL?
The question was Spencer Thomas's role versus ADP's role on implementing of the project, but I believe.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So Spencer Thomas Group was really part of the JLL team, right? So our resources were client-side support resources working with the ADP implementation team. So the ADP Streamline implementation team, they have some local resources. They had an overall project manager, as ADP always does. What Spencer Thomas Group did was we were really partners with JLL. Our resources helped them in country. Araceli helped overall project management, and then my role was more of overall program management here in the U.S., working across the JLL execs, helping with key decision making, and kind of driving the big picture. So we were really part of the JLL team versus part of the ADP team.
Okay, thank you, Greg. And I have one last question for Carlos. What was the greatest benefit of hiring a third party?
Yeah, I really liked that in your poll, the most popular response was you don't know what you don't know. If JLL was taking that poll, we would have answered definitely in line with that response. We didn't have expertise or the right expertise in every country. We didn't know, in some of the situations, what was the right answer, how do we start, who do we go to? So, and you saw in an earlier slide that, one of the first steps we did there upon starting on this path was look for that expertise externally. And so Spencer Thomas, was providing that expertise for us. I think Greg also mentioned, besides Araceli that's based in Mexico, we also had, folks in Argentina and Brazil helping us on the Spencer side that, spoke, the local language and understood those countries, which are, our largest countries, and were able to help guide us through, how to get this across the finish line. So I would say the expertise was probably the greatest benefit. I kind of wanted to expand a little bit, and I think Araceli made this point as well, just for the folks on the call, that being realistic, and I think when we set up the plan, and this was before, really engaging with ADP or Spencer Thomas, we were terribly ambitious. We had very aggressive timeline. We had, a million objectives, so we not only were, changing our payroll provider, we were changing work streams pretty much from A to Z, from onboarding to who's entering information for labor changes, et cetera. So everything was changed, and we also, moved towards a centralized model. So we were very ambitious. Some of those were tied into, having a positive ROI on the project. But I think, early, if you could get someone that has, that expertise on early to your project, so they can help you, establish realistic objectives, realistic timeline, I think that would have helped tremendously up front. But yeah, that was definitely a learning from JLL side.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. Those are all the questions that we have today. And this wraps up our presentation for you today. If anyone has any non-English speakers that would benefit from this information, please contact Eric and he would be happy to set up a call to speak with them directly. Or if you have any questions you weren't able to ask today, feel free to reach out to us. You can also find Greg and Eric's contact information on our website, spencer-thomas.com. Do you have anything else to add, Greg?
No, fantastic. I just want to thank everyone who joined. Yes, and please reach out to myself with any questions, and certainly we'll engage Eric and/or Araceli, both with ability to speak Spanish and Portuguese, which unfortunately I do not. So we will definitely hook you up with the right people in your organization and the right people in Spencer Thomas group as well. And I also would mention that Carlos speaks Spanish as well, so we can certainly help you if you've got folks in LATAM who would benefit from this in speaking with Carlos Araceli or Eric from Spencer Thomas Group. So thank you again for your participation.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.